All right, here we are back again with hopefully the finishing off of the accumulation and labor and degradation of women. Oh my God, I'm just realizing how big this chapter is.
Yeah.
So much shit going on. God. Well, I guess we just stopped at the taming of women and the redefinition of femininity and masculinity. Women, the savages of Europe. And this section starts with a bang. It says, it is not surprising then, in view of this devaluation of women's labor and social status, that the insubordination of women and the methods by which they could be tamed were among the main themes in the literature and social policy of the transition. Women could not have been totally devalued as workers and deprived of autonomy with respect to men without being subjected to an intense process of social degradation. And indeed, throughout the 16th and 17th century, women lost ground in every area of social life. Yeah, so that is the claim. And I guess it was 2 weeks ago, I guess last time we talked about it. And that kind of that process was, as I recall, we were talking about the movements from the rural into the urban and back and forth. But mainly you had this destruction of women's involvement in different modes of production, but domestication and legal codes and changing of norms are kind of the primary kind of general tools of this devaluation. That's what I recall. And then I guess, is this a section when she wants to talk about the literary cultural stuff? I guess she does remember this. I remember right about it. Yeah. I guess,
Yeah.
I mean, there's like
Next page, she's citing
there you go.
Taming of the Shrew and other examples.
Right.
Yeah.
Taming
And
of the Shrew. Sorry.
I even see here about says here, what is this? This is third paragraph from the start. She says, in the middle of that paragraph, she says, for example, English women were discouraged from sitting in front of their homes or staying near their windows. They were also instructed not to spend time with their female friends in this period. The term gossip, female friend, began to acquire a disparaging connotation. It was even recommended that women should not visit their parents too often after marriage. And I think like examples like this, she's kind of talking about this, you know, kind of proto versions of shock doctrine of tearing apart certain existing systems of social relation that empower people, or rather people rely on for collective action.
And making women dependent on men and it necessary for them to marry a man to take care of them. And this is something that kind of is still just barely going away.
Yeah, there's this
go bankrupt or lose all their money because of a divorce.
There's this tendency to utilize, I don't think it's explicitly talked about in here, but to utilize the fascinations of the day and bend them towards this political interest. And so this is sort of the era in which we start seeing appeal to antiquity about how in ancient Athens, it was customary for women never to leave the house unescorted by either their brother or their husband or their father or whatever, right? That women were always they were always warded. And that's something that people like created this fiction that it's been, that was a technology of social control that was lost that we should reinstitute, because that kind of scholastic or classics oriented study was at its height at that moment in the intellectual sphere. And it's not to say that those things didn't happen in Greece, but that's like irrelevant. And I think it's a stretch to say it happened all over the place or something like that. That's not like how a particular class of women were warded in Greece. But anyways, it gets tied back through by any means necessary, this new discipline, this regimen of discipline for women gets tied back to any authority it can be tied to.
Yeah,
And
go ahead.
I was thinking of the modern explanation for that, which goes to neuroscience and differences in male and female brains, which is this, it strikes me as very kind of performing the same function as what you were saying, Mike.
Yeah, it was, I mean, if you're there, I mean, it was really interesting to listen to or watch this confirmation hearing of the new Supreme Court nominee, and the question of like, what is a woman? Which, I mean, I understand it's all theater, of course, but when you like listen to the whole, like at first she was like, I'm not a biologist or something like that. So like that was the first reaction. But then there was this whole circus of people like, oh, she doesn't even know this simple answer, which kind of, like had me wondering. It's like, well, can one of you answer that question? At least, because if you're saying like, oh, you're a fucking idiot, you don't know the answer to this like simple question. Well, what is the answer? Which was missing. And then I saw like someone, of course, like tweeting like I don't know, some chromosome stuff. And it's, yeah, no, I mean, it's just fascinating, like how dead on these things are. But I don't know. I would still at least like to see some discourse on it, just to see like where people are with these things. Yeah, I don't know.
Part of what I'm hearing from everyone, including myself, is that these are like just so stories, and that's not necessarily unique to like what is a woman, right? That is sort of like a much broader phenomenon that we have like circular and self-defining definitions for a lot of shit. And so it is important to know where people are at on it. To take an analogy, I think I run into a lot of people who are very resistant to contextualizing a concept like racism as anything other than interpersonal animus. And to which my fundamental response is like, okay, that's fine. Give me a different word. I don't care what we call the word. Like, I'm trying to talk about a different concept than you then. Like,
right.
We talk about this concept over here. I don't give a shit what it's called.
Yeah, why not just call it animus at that point? I mean, we seem to already have a word for it. And at that point, then everything is fucking racism, right? Like everything becomes an expression. Right. It's weird you say that because I was getting ready to go to this one class. So I was listening to the Field Sisters again. They were talking to Ta-Nehisi Coates. I just didn't want to go back. I didn't have time to read the introduction to racecraft. But she was saying exactly what you're saying, because one of the sociologist one was look, we need a lot of kind of active and precise words if we're going to deal with these things. Like the more which is a very kind of analytic kind of like not analytic argument, but in the spirit of analytic
Sure.
philosophy, which I was happy, which I was very much in agreement. And you know, she was saying like more verbs and kind of active words, because she was like, look, you're talking about human action in the world, right? You're not just talking about thoughts, or you're not talking about like epiphenomena. You're talking about things that collective societies do, right? Not even individuals. So yeah. Yeah, so what else? Anything else in this section here?
I mean, not that I think this is the origin of it, and I'm not that interested in the origin, but I think this is a useful early example of that reactionary tendency to blame the marginalized group for doing exactly what is being done to them, or something like that, you know, right? Like on page 101, where it's talking about taming the shrew, 'tis a pity she's a whore, the arraignment of lewd, idle, forward, and inconstant women in the parliament of women. A satire primarily addressed against middle-class women, which portrays them as busy making laws in order to gain supremacy over their husbands, which is, you know, a bit silly given it's a bit absurd given the context of what's literally happening.
Right. Yeah, and actually here regarding that the same scenario, she has this paragraph starts with how the new sexual division. She says, how the new sexual division of labor reshaped male-female relations can be seen from the broad debate that was carried out in the learned and popular literature on the nature of female virtue and vices, blah, blah, blah. Then she goes, known from an early phase as, what is that?
The question of women.
The question of women? Okay.
Like the woman question.
Oh, gotcha.
Exactly.
There.
La Querelle de Femme.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. What transpires from this debate is a new sense of curiosity for the subject, indicating that old norms were breaking down and the public was becoming aware that the basic elements of sexual politics were being reconstructed. Wonderful, right? I mean, like, she's like, when do we ask these questions? When they're like fucking going out the door. Very Hegelian, by the way, right? Like, got that ala Minerva thing. Two trends within this debate can be identified. On the one hand, new cultural canons were constructed, maximizing the difference between women and men, in creating more feminine and more masculine prototypes. On the other hand, it was established that women were inherently inferior to men, excessively emotional and lusty, unable to govern themselves, and had to be placed under male control. Right, then you guys talked about shrew. And 'Tis a Pity She's a Whore by John Forth. Never seen that one. And then there's the Parliament of Women, a satire primarily addressed against middle-class women, which portrays them as busy making laws in order to gain supremacy over their husbands.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's like it doesn't matter what you do, like everything becomes questionable and comical and imbued with bad intention.
And contradictory, that how, if they're so over emotional, how are they able to work together to kind of manipulate their husbands, deceive them to create these laws?
Yeah, it's sort of
This
what,
pattern in bigotry and racism with lots of other groups.
yeah,
Yeah.
that feels very in line with, you know, the like Umberto Eco notion of fascism, of like the enemy is strong and weak at the same time, right? This is like not I don't think it's an originary example, but it's it's one of these places where we find a pillar of women are lusty, and that's why men are out having all these extra relationships, right? Women are overly emotional, and yet they can conspire to make laws against to control men. You know.
Yeah. And Edward Said has this notion too, like with the image of the Arab who is it's same thing, like from one side he's very like for the rapey and lusty, but he's also sexually repressed, right? Like there's the harem and then there's the harem, right? And then the kind of this subject's fantasy has to kind of oscillate between those two constantly.
Yeah, they're lazy, but they're so fundamentally hardworking that we're going to call the first mechanical engine the mechanical, you know.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's interesting because I'm thinking now of Hannah Arendt talking about the dictator being both strong and weak too, being kind of subhuman, but also superhuman. So that the follower can, see them as a kind of be above them, but also, look up to them at the same time.
They're a common person and a superhuman.
Just interesting. It depends on the kind of, I guess, moral valuation on whichever group you're talking about. Like this is the bad group, but they still view them, or this is the good person, they still view them in these same kind of strong, with the strong weak lens.
Sure.
Yeah. Yeah, and I just like what I mean. Now I'm trying to think about like why. I mean, I understand. They're like
silly answer.
Huh?
I have a silly answer, and it's
yeah. Let's hear it.
Everyone's a virtue ethicist, and they're striving for the golden mean, and so excesses and having too little or too much is really what they rebel against. I don't think that's real though.
No, I mean I think you're right. I mean, it's more cognizable too. I mean, going back to Arendt, who's more like, look, shit's more banal than you think. And I'm reading all this again. It's like this research going, looking at these people in the Soviet era. But then I'm reading this biography of like Stalin, and it's like, the author is really trying here. It's not a great book because he's really, everything as a foreshadowing of like, Ukraine happening, the starvations, and of course the purges, blah, blah, blah. But like, when you're studying Stalin, he's just reading and he's doing bureaucratic work. Like when a list is passed to him with 70 names on it, he's working, he's at his desk, he looks at these names, he checks them, and he works a lot and he writes a lot and he just does boring shit. And then he, takes a vacation by the Baltic and then he comes back. You know what I mean? And some of these people literally live in Kremlin, which I didn't know. But like that excitement that you think is behind this kind of these atrocities of humanity are a lot less dramatic.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking the animus you think behind it is not there, so maybe that's not a bad word because it's not, it is more banal in practice.
Yeah. Right. I mean, there is again, it's like with Eichmann, Eichmann testimonies, he's talking about Kant and duty but most of the how much of a good bureaucrat he was and how clean and orderly and a lot of use of cliches. And then you're like, this guy was really managing trains, I mean, at the end of the day, it's just like there's nothing anti-Semitic about him. You wouldn't really understand that. It's just like as Arendt puts it, like on thought and disregard, negligent disregard for, as we say, United States, for like human life. But now I'm like, how would you reconcile this with Federici, who wants to kind of make it more, give it a more determinism, determination, not necessarily intention. I guess they're not mutually exclusive, really.
Yeah, even the Nazis had propaganda efforts, were redefining social relations, but also there were people like Eichmann.
Yeah.
Can you really trust, how much can you trust him, and how much did that not influence him in some way?
Well, how much
I think the idea is you could, but the idea is you can just you could have put him in any other society and he would have like fit in America, being the train director, no problem.
Yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess the resolution or the culpability comes by saying like we're not in Rawls's thought experiment, where we're like designing a society down to the smallest level and unaware of the, we're not blind to the effects of what we're doing, even if he like literally has no idea what's on the train. Like it's it's the I often think about it in the terms of the show Star Trek, because so many of them engage or revolve around, so many of the movies especially revolve around some like rogue admiral who fielded a some sort of warship and is going off to commit a nuclear bombing war atrocity somewhere. And you're like, yeah, the admiral didn't build that ship.
Right.
The admiral didn't requisition all of the metal for it, didn't make the space station that built it, didn't make this logistical chain, didn't, all of the things that go into this. You're talking about like a multi-million person conspiracy. That's not a conspiracy anymore. That's Starfleet, the whole thing, top to the bottom,
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm just like keeping examples comes to mind. Like another one of like the incredibly boring books I've read was this journalist. I went to hang out with this guy, the guy who dropped the first bomb on Hiroshima. He was an Enola Gay, and the most boring book because the guy was a fucking idiot. Like, you know, because I was at a party, I was very young. We had just come to the United States. Like, I heard someone talking about like the discussion going, and they were like, "Oh, you gone crazy after doing that?" And Mercy. And I read that book, and it's like, you know, these like white grandpas with, you know, those big old like Navy hats. Like that was the dude, and it was just like, "I'll do it again. They gave me a bum. I dread the bum." You know what I mean? Like there was no mystery. Like this guy was just like, "Look, I did the planes. I'll do it again. I saved a lot of people, but I was just told to go do, you know, I was the most complacent, orderly person and they sent me, you know. And then the book was like, you know, the rest of this 400 pages, I don't know. It was just like this poor journalist trying to draw a meaning out of this. And I see that like we see this in law, you know, I mean, especially like where the teacher got mens rea with like the intentionality is in criminal law. That's where they really bring it out. And then it becomes an obsession, you know, then like your higher classes to take, and suddenly like, you know, you're sitting in antitrust class as I'm sitting today, or you know, land use stuff, where back in the day you were like, look, disparate effect, like it's clear, like who gives a shit, like the results seem to be very you know, anti-competitive or racist or whatever. But now like you have to contemplate like what were the intentionalities of Microsoft, you know, and how fucking absurd is that, right? Especially like in vertical mergers, right, where it's not other corporations but like I'm gonna eat the supply chain and all this stuff. And yeah, so now you're like litigate, you're trying to solve a horrible like situation, right, where like, oh my fucking god, like this corporation is like eating everything. And you have like, you know, 600 lawyers in fucking some New York federal courtroom just like contemplating like how you establish like a an entity's mental state of mind in order to get culpability. um yeah, I don't know, just
Interesting.
examples. Yeah.
That reminds me of, you know, the, I don't know when time period, but when they used to try animals for crimes,
Oh yeah.
similar problems, or maybe some, look, they should look into AI research possibly, or AI theory.
Well, I think, you know, it's like antitrust in particular is probably more of a legacy of historical happenstance, being a law that was written directly to make the Standard Oil Trust illegal, because their stuff was so intentional. They were intentionally trying to corner a market. But you know, the reason why the law was written in that way is because you know, monopoly is not an outlier to capitalism. It's the end goal. And so they're trying to like, how can we keep the capitalism and stop this one necessary eventual outcome by making the bar a little lower, right?
Yeah.
By
And
saying,
it keeps getting lower.
right. It now, you know, is it like, when does it become non-competitive? Is it, you know, how many percentage points of the market do you have to take over? How many degrees
Which
of
we got rid of.
right?
Yeah, like percentage like went out the door because now we're going after this intentionality. Like how, like it was conspiracy, like was there, you know, it's like, or was it like parallel agreements? Like, but you're right. I mean, you see the necessity of that type of thinking. But like other, like aside from that, like I always wonder what we're looking for because it's not very helpful. Like, yes, it is helpful while you're in the system of like saying, you know, if Johnny accidentally shot this person, and of course Johnny has less culpability than if Johnny did it, you know, with a vengeance, or if he was like, you know, under duress or something. But even in that instance, I'm like, we're trying to like undo violence. We're not really worried about Johnny, are we? Which we are. We are very
Yeah, it
highly
makes more
individual
sense.
focused.
Yeah, it makes more sense for there if you take like a retributive punishment model or something.
Yeah.
For a corporation, you're not trying to punish. There's no kind of punishment you need to mete out on them for being a bad boy,
Wow.
a spanking. It's
Interesting.
you just need to stop a certain. You're trying to stop a certain conditions from happening, which are percentage points and market share kind of stuff.
Yeah.
And it's possible with a corporation that it might actually be effective to engage in retributive disciplining models, right? Be like, if you made $100 million off of this illegal thing, you pay 150 million for it. Whatever you made, you pay that much plus more. You pay whatever the rate is of all the unexplored ones. So we're just mathematically we're taking back everything you get by ill-gotten gains, right? Or whatever.
Yeah.
You know, or you're just out of the company, or you punish the people in charge of it, right? There are ways, because of the impersonality and because it is an incentive structure, where it makes sense there. And so it's like doubly backwards that we're like,
Yeah. But it's funny though, because when suddenly like it comes like time for Hobby Lobby, right? Like suddenly there is, you know, the into like the suddenly there is a actual person, which is the
right,
family that runs it, that their mental state becomes one with the corporation, i.e., I'm a Christian that is not allowed to dole
yeah,
out healthcare to women.
you know.
Yeah. But when it comes to time for punishment, like take Elon Musk now, right? He bought 5% and he told no one. So he bought the
It was like 9%, right?
he started at 5 and then he slowly went up during that week, which you have to announce, because of course if you had announced, those shares would have been a lot more expensive because Elon Musk. But announced, I'm like, what is like FEC gonna do? You gonna charge a, you know, multi-billion-dollar person? Like, first of all, he has no money. Like, you can't. It's not like he has a bank account. It's not like you can damage this man and charge him $300 million a day. Like, it's not. You cannot punish this thing. Like, it is beyond your reach.
Monster.
It is a fucking monster. Yeah,
I think that's the problem with what Mark was saying, because they've made these corporations as protection from any kind of punishment or consequences for what they do, you know, and the Mott and Bailey kind of action, like, oh, I'm the corporation. No, the corporation is an entity over there. It's convenient, you know.
Right. Unless
you're inside the walls, corporations outside the walls.
Right.
Oh, corporation was just here. You just missed him. It's just me.
Yeah, it's funny. That's what Alex Jones doing now. Like he's funneling all his money shell companies because you know he's being sued the fuck out of. But
yeah, and he's been like not going to court and just getting charged money every day.
Yeah, and losing this stuff, but it's you and I that's going to pay for that expensive litigation. You know, I mean, unless that money's paid. Yeah. Yeah, so sorry, I totally like, how do we get into this intentionality? I guess we were talking about the mechanisms of like first seeing that kind of what is that double consciousness, but from the outside, not what that's your subject is feeling, the thing, the subject that you're trying to objectify. But the person that is just doing the objectification has those goes through those kind of mental emotions, or rather, like collectively, that's how they appear in arts and aesthetics and law.
I think we
Yeah.
were talking about, Federici is not invested in the question of intentionality, or at least doesn't seem so, and seems to want to say like on page 100 at the top. As with the condemnation of witchcraft, consensus on this matter cut across religious and intellectual lines, from the pulpit or the written pages. Humanists, Protestant reformers, counter-reformations, Catholics, all cooperated in the vilification of women constantly and obsessively, right? And and just the men in society in general. She talks about notable exceptions, but there's like a wide amount of cooperation, collaboration, and like not like anti-solidarity going on, where men are like putting their head down when the stuff's happening, and we still see the effect, like not only the effect in the sense of like the fact that feminine mores exist today, that we're sort of like disciplined into existence through this. We also see, like, we have the narrative of the Salem witch trial, which simultaneously marginalizes the entire witch hunts by being like, whatever, it's 26 people in Massachusetts, who gives a shit, and then also makes it little girls accusing other adult women of being witches, right? Yeah. And like totally distances the role of the prosecutors, the Whately family, the men in the town, right, who are complicit. Even if they do nothing, they're complicit,
Yeah, most certainly.
Yeah, I wanted to, emphasize too that it's violence. It's not just everyone's kind of being convinced that it is a very strong narrative that's taking shape, but she does, compare how women are treated to Native Americans and African slaves. The same kind of hostility.
Yeah, that kind of coercive, and then it returns, and you're right, because it has no benefit to that society other than those who stand to benefit from the processes of production and exchange, because the men suffer too. I mean,
right.
Yeah.
This is the part I think that as a feminist I would critique Federici for the most on this, is she's not explicit enough that the women being subject to the torture and the witch hunts in general, they definitely start off as subjects in this. They are, because they are in positions of leadership, but by the end of the witch hunts, by the sort of like, as it transitions into Victorianism and into the modern era and into today, it's not about women as subjects anymore. It's about women as objects. The reason why it was prosecuted beyond the point of just breaking apart these peasant revolutions was because it was about disciplining men into being productive workers. And so in a sense, I think there's like a deep cruelness or tragicness or something, that like even the witch hunts aren't about the women, right? It's in some real sense, they're not even considered important to the people who are like prosecuting it, don't even consider the women important that they're torturing. They're torturing them to get to the men.
Right. So they're just the means to this process. And you were saying that a couple of sessions ago about rape as a weapon and to the same effect, which is like almost worse. I mean, and I'm trying to think worse in what way. I mean, it's a lot more dehumanizing when you know you go to some Yugoslavian, I don't know, village, and you're just in order to get at men, or in order to like undercut their future, you kind of fall upon their women as a lesson. And then that has a very coercive effect in that culture as it develops. And I'm not saying in this what the protection of women, of course. I mean, like I see, and you know, I don't know enough about the background of this whole Will Smith thing, but you know, like when you read, especially early Malcolm X, he's obsessed with keeping Black women away from white men, and he talks about that a lot, as in relation to urban oppression and slavery and rape, and how like the pride of the society is reliant on the purity of its women. But he's also saying that, oh, we don't have access to your women, why should you have our women? So then there's this possessive thing. Of course, you know, he grows out of these quick. He's relating these about his early on. But again, and I know and I know Will Smith's from Philly. I don't know. I understand he's a Scientologist. I don't know if he was ever. I don't know if he has any connection with Nation of Islam, but it was very interesting that after he smacked Chris Rock, like he was like, and then you know he won that Oscar. He went out there and he was like, I am a loving father, and love makes you do crazy thing. And I think that was pretty much it. And it was like, that's a like very bizarre way of putting like, and you know, he's like crying and people clapping, like there is this like whole bizarre situation. And not to like, you know, start talking about that whole shit, but it, like this whole idea that, look, I mean, it's important to be Chris Rock. Like Chris Rock came from like that man, like he made it in entertainment from nothing as a Black man in America. And he made it in multifaceted part of it, right? Comedy, movies, directing, documentaries. Ironically, a documentary about Black hair. But to go in an instance and commit violence against another, you know, very important human, not important, but just like I'm just trying to kind of navigate this correctly. Not only a human being, but a human being that represents something for a certain ethnicity. And Chris Rock is always been very conservative. He's a lot closer to Cosby in that sense of that, you know, we need to have a presentation to a point that was kind of problematic in the 90s. I don't remember, you remember some of those jokes about there are N-words and then there are Black people type, which a lot of white people ran with. Regardless, but like, I guess what I'm saying is like those patriotic, self-serving urges were so strong in that moment. If I am to kind of make all these fucking presumptions, that you would just go and like fuck someone up. Yeah. I don't know.
Yeah, definitely something you see in more kind of machismo-ish cultures that you have to protect your women from someone else.
Yeah.
And yeah, and I don't know, I think it connects to Federici by thinking about women are becoming this kind of resource that has to be controlled. And then maybe that gets taken to this individual level, like this is my kind of access to reproduction, to fertility. I have to protect it from, and it goes into like all this kind of alpha male kind of bullshit psychology, which again is kind of tied to, like evolutionary psychology kind of just so stories for that about kind
Yeah.
of, protecting your man from the rival or your woman from the rival male.
Yeah. One of the first thing, like in Iran, like when Khomeini was right before the revolution, he becomes very obsessed in the 70s with women. I mean, there were a lot of these people were, even Fanon and these guys. And he's keep writing because the monarchy is trying to modernize, so they're trying to advance certain suffrage movements, whatever it may be, like raising the age of consent to 18, and sometimes it's just to look modern, but whatever. And he keeps talking about, he uses this word when he makes his speeches of rights, that women are lucht, which means they're naked, because Iran had never, didn't have policy of hijab. Like there was, certain classes that did it. Um, um, anyways, but and of course, 1979, like one of the first thing they do when the Islamists, they come to power is to, first you have to wear hijab at work, then mandatory everywhere. But James is like very dead on, at least in this instance, like that obsession of they're westernizing, right? The word they use, and this word is actually like the socialists came up with it in the 60s and 50s, which was Zadegi, which roughly translates into like Western, being poisoned by Western culture. But it was most definitely, most of the time it was leveled against women. And one of the first thing that these guys do is lower the age of consent back to 15 or 14 or something. But it's exactly what James, I mean, you and James saying. I mean, it's to the earlier you can marry a young woman, right? Especially from lower classes, because that's the kid you have to give away. You keep the son to, until he's fucking 40. We're kind of like Jews in that protects, like, provides for the family. But it goes under control. Like she leaves home and goes into another household, and then pretty much works for free there.
Right.
Of course, I'm not trying to make every marriage an instance of like experience of oppression just on a societal level. I'm sure there are people that found happiness in worst of things, but
Of course.
yeah. And any more on this one? Very good books. Very thought-provoking. Should we go to colonializing? I've used that word too many times. Colonialization, globalization, and women. You guys good to go to there? Go there?
I'm good with that.
All right. Oh, now my highlightings are moving. I'm going to switch to that PDF. What did I highlight here? Well, let me, as always, just read the thesis, which it throws up top, which is great. While the response to the population crises in Europe was the subjugation of women to reproduction, in colonial America, where colonization destroyed 90% of the Aboriginal population, the response was the slave trade, which delivered to the European ruling class an immense quantity of labor power. I'll come back to that later. And coming to my notes here. Oh my God, are the numbers on this changing again? Yeah, guys. I don't know. I have notes here, but they're about David Graeber. I love
Well,
it when,
yeah, I'll just say what she's saying there.
please, yeah.
Where it is.
I don't know what I was
We've
thinking.
seen how there was a lot of people died because of the Black Death. So the response was all the what we've talked about, the disciplining of women, taming of women, as she puts it. But in the U.S., where I think at this point there was mostly men who would be coming over anyway on the early colonists,
Correct.
settlers, and as we talked about already, like 95% of the indigenous population had died off because of diseases that the settlers brought.
Mhm.
They couldn't really say, okay, well, we're going to subjugate women, and it might take a few years to get more workers. So they developed, the response was the slave trade. Just bring workers over immediately to fill in that gap. Or they would have used Native Americans if they could have.
Yeah, and I
Yeah.
mean, they
And
tried
so-
that at like Cerro de Potosi, right? And they, worked them all to death, right? So there was like, it wasn't all whoops, it's a plague.
Yes, there were instances of that. Either they escaped or they died.
mm,
It just wouldn't work on the same scale for like
Right.
certain reasons.
Yeah, but that the relative emptiness of the land because of the massive die-off of the human population of the Americas, especially in the East, which is not different in the East as it is in the West, because as we expressed, I think in the first time we all met together, talking about like the length of these trade networks that existed in the Americas. The European diseases followed those trade networks all the way to Alaska and down into South America, and a lot of that was from just following everywhere that the Europeans landed. But there was a much lower human population of indigenous folks on the East Coast because that's where far more of the Europeans landed. And by the time they got further and further west, population numbers had slowly started to rebound. Anyways, it is important that relative lack of people there means that you have a land without a people, quote unquote, right? Terra nullius, that you can send first the excess populations of Europe to, because by this point, Europe is seeing the fallout of having totally taken, or not totally, but so dramatically taken control of women's bodies away from them, and the massive population increase in Europe and the many like territorial, religious, cultural squabbles that are going on incessantly, right? Like colonization becomes a pressure release valve for excess European populations. And then, early like labor organization is one of the initial prompts for slavery in the Americas. You have it sort of in 1609 in Portuguese colonies, right? And it's relatively dysfunctional. I mean, as nascent technologies are often, but it's really in the tobacco colonies of Virginia where we see it as a way to we see its power as a way to break strikes of the British Virginia tobacco farmers. So like, it's the reason that's relevant is because each one of these is a population that European women, West African slaves, and indigenous peoples of America are all populations that their continued dispossession should be creating externalized consequences that Europe has to soak somehow, but Europe is redirecting the consequences back to each one of these groups. So the extra consequences from taking control of women's bodies away is being funneled into excess populations to go and conquer and colonize. And the excess populations or the enslaved populations of the Americas are used to go and move into a land that's relatively empty because we've exterminated the peoples, which should have rendered the Americas useless for exploitation and expropriation. So each one of these three pillars of capitalism that she's outlining, they mutually support each other in a vice cycle.
Yeah, right. That's true. That's very true. Yeah, no, I mean, and there's hiccups of it. I'm trying to kind of think about, I mean, first you go to the islands, right? And these are well documented. I mean, it's like through some journals and yeah, you send a bunch of folks, they go, they they immediately enslave these people, put them to work, or they die, or they're too lazy. So they think, as they say they're too lazy, they try to take them away, bring them back to Europe to do some work. Then you come to Virginia and you go down to modern day, where the French were, like down in Georgia and Florida, Mississippi. And you have this lush land, which is full of people. You keep pushing them out. Then you stop. I mean, with the British, they're like, the king, like, don't go over the mountains, which is exactly what the founding fathers wanted to do, especially George Washington. Yeah, I guess in the shorter form, then you have yeah, you have like almost like a purposeless type of imperialism that just develops out of action, because I just still can't know why. Like, I mean, yes, we understand like primitive accumulation, curiosity, land grab, but I mean, had Europe at that point recovered such level of its population that we were, talking about, that this becomes necessary, right?
think part of it too is well, it's always talked about with Australia, but it's probably the same with the US that, and Mark, you were mentioning this kind of excess of the population there. It would be a lot of times that people who were criminals, vagabonds, people who weren't able to kind of as assimilate into the kind of new working state of mind.
Exactly.
So those they want to get rid of. It's the troublemakers, the knuckleheads, whatever.
Which does double duty. That's exactly what I mean about the disciplining of women and the concomitant disciplining of the European worker, is that you simultaneously expel the bad examples and
Rabble rousers and stuff.
raise the bar for those who stayed behind, saying like, now you're the lowest hanging fruit. You will be plucked next unless you step it up. And you send them just, the Siberian frontier in Russia is like the most pronounced example of this, of the like, you just continuously send them further east in Russia. You say like, well, now you go there and you build the next frontier zone. And as soon as you build it up, we're going to take everything away from you and just push you further east again. And if you die, whatever, nobody gives a shit, right? The whole point is you're going to go there and you're going to build something productive, or you're going to die without being a problem that we have to manage anymore. And both are positives.
Yeah, the same thing. The same thing with what the Soviet Union did with the their kind of native equivalent of Eskimos.
Mhm.
And I don't recall the names of these different folks, but yeah, to of course, at first this collectivization. I mean, these people are already collectivized, but collectivization and extraction of that wealth into the bigger pile, right? Except like there is so much like accumulation you can do, like when you have that kind of that form of subsistent life in that type of frozen kind of environment, at least partially for a year, which leads to decimation, of course, right? I mean, yeah, there's so much you can, but it's also inconsequential, actually beneficial, because then you down the road, of course, you didn't know this initially. You go and drill over there or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and as about the question of European populations, did the population rebound so much? Not necessarily, but it's also with the twin inflection point of the extraction level, the like resource extraction level is ramped up. And so, like this is that groundwork out of which you start to get like these Malthusian kind of prophetic visions of the future or something like that, as seeing how you get a sharp decline in the resource availability and a sharp decline in the commons with a sharp increase in the population. And you say like, okay, well, that can't keep up forever, right?
Oh, it's like a projection. It's like that biopolitical projection that, oh, there's going to be exponential growth. Is that what you're saying, kind of?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is the space out of which that kind of cultural imagination emerges from.
Yeah.
And, you know, I like true and not true at the same time.
I mean, at least the city is. I mean, the city is always crowded,
Right.
right? I mean, the urban center.
Mhm.
I guess it doesn't even matter. Like, I guess, yeah. I mean, what is important, I guess, is that it's perceived that way, is acted upon, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm gonna find some notes on these. The arrival stuff. Sorry. I don't know if one of you guys want to take it forward while I go through these notes.
I think on the bottom page 104, the paragraph that says, did workers in Europe know that they were buying products resulting from slave labor? And if they did they object to it? It's a question we would like to ask them, but is one I cannot answer. What is certain is that the history of tea, sugar, rum, tobacco, and cotton is far more significant than we can deduce from the contribution which these commodities made as raw materials or means of exchange in the slave trade to the rise of what is more certain is that they are more significant than we can deduce to the rise of the factory system. Gotcha. For what traveled with these exports was not only the blood of the slaves, but the seeds of a new science of exploitation and a new division of the working class by which waged work, rather than providing an alternative to slavery, was made to depend on it for its existence as a means, like female unpaid labor, for the expansion of the unpaid part of the waged working day. And I think that sort of addresses a question we were talking about earlier of like, where does she want to situate intent or culpability or something like that? And just saying like, I'm just talking about the system, you know, something like that.
Well, at least with, I mean, these are people who, the workers in Europe had little power to kind of change things in the system. And I made me think of, you know, people today who buy things from Amazon. I think there's a lot of parallels here. She's talking about, there's a lot of slave-like conditions in a lot of how the goods get.
Right.
I think at the same time, it's, you know, people who are workers in Europe then or now are not making a lot of money. And like you're saying, it's not intentional. It's just, this is what you got to do to kind of make ends meet.
Sure.
But as with the intentionality for, you know, the heads of state or clergy, I'm not sure, because it seems like it could, I could see both out of this, that it's just, they're just kind of following these same kind of logical kind of necessities, or they have an intentionality to do these certain things.
Sure. Yeah, and what, you know, what's meaningfully different maybe there is like, if a citizen of Britain wanted to avoid buying something of slave labor, maybe there was a way to do that, but it was probably relatively equally fraught in most senses. You'd be like, well, I'm going to buy from a Slavic person instead of a literally enchained person. And nowadays we have the cynical form of which I'm not trying to say we should never engage in. I think there are valuable places for it, but we have a very cynical form of conscious capitalism, wherein, you know, we criticize poor folks, generally poor and working class folks, for buying from Amazon. But if they buy from, but it used to be Walmart, and now if you're buying from Walmart, well, at least you're not buying from Amazon or whatever. The like bar is like on the ground. And just like the Democratic Party, the entire advertising campaign is, well, at least we're only second worst.
Yeah, and the thing is, Federici, the system requires them to buy from Amazon in vast amounts for it to keep functioning as it is. If people all of a sudden started buying everything from organic, fair trade, little corner shops,
Mhm.
that would be a definite change in
Mhm.
the economic system.
Yeah, and that's because I have written here, and I think you guys already said this. You need cheap goods for the reproduction of the working class, of course. You want to, yeah, the less you pay, the better. More capital for you, but also you want to have cheap goods to, I guess this is kind of advent of Ford model. You want the workers to become consumers,
Right.
and then that leads that corresponds to the wage given to the worker realizes the value of the good produced
Mhm.
under slavery and realization. And I'm just like, um, of course, the capital. I mean, there's capital under movement, which is great. It goes to these other things all the time, and it circulates. And then there is the value that capital has produced inside commodities, and it's nothing until it's realized. It's until it's I mean, it's not nothing, but when it's turned to price, that's good. And you can have the worker do it, the worker do it himself. And
Yeah.
that becomes a new science of exploitation. Okay, yeah.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I was saying.
That is the science, right, on the science of exploitation part. Like, it's another form of this, three-pillared system. But, we often think about the idea of expanding the market to include the workers because of the limitations. Like, eventually capital ran out of new markets to open up, and so it started trying to like open up its own workers as a form of market. And that's certainly true. That's certainly part of it, but it's also a way to get workers to pay themselves to not riot, right? Like, this is instead of being given the material, a positive change in material conditions that they want out of doing the work, they're offered access to a market as like now you might not literally die if you have appendicitis or something like that.
Yeah.
And that should be seen as an insult, but instead it's seen as gains for the working class, because of course it's both.
Yeah, no, that's very true. And kind of two examples of that I can think about from last week is like the Howard Schultz has returned to Starbucks, of course, as CEO, and he was giving that talk about how, it's like, I gotta tell you something. The union, they're assaulting corporations. And of course he's using that word. But he was also like, he was trying to kind of pull some Elon swag, and he was like, well, we're also going into NFTs and guess what you guys get? He's talking to his workers. And on the other hand, I'm thinking, yeah, go.
Are you
No,
gonna
go ahead.
go on? I just want to say with Howard Schultz, yeah, because he was
Yeah.
known for, when he came in, like improving conditions for workers, but also being anti-union and
Yeah.
health partners and all this stuff. But so he wants to like keep that kind of and he just came back in and he wants to keep that relationship. We're like, no, we'll just keep giving you good things as long as you don't, we'll keep giving you
Yeah.
treats. As long as you don't-
Yeah, like education funding and stuff like that.
And I hope
But
they
the most
hold out
minimal.
against that. That's hard because it's like all these like temptations, like Jesus getting tempted there.
Yeah.
And of course, they tempt you with things you want, not things you don't want. Just so rude of them.
NFTs. Well, I don't know NFTs,
But it's amazing that the carrot, it keeps getting like more less material and more of an idea, right? Like at first it's like, you know, Starbucks, you know, like you remember, you guys remember, we're the same age, right? Like you remember like the friends that you had that worked at Starbucks, like, you know, they got to wear the, you know, I don't know, cool glasses, and they had like, I don't know, like some sort of insurance. Um, you know, like your Starbucks and Costco friends were more well off than your than you, who worked in kitchens or factories and stuff. But it seems like you know, and I'm thinking of before that you had like full insurance and full education and all that, and but now we've gotten to a point where Howard Schultz is like, you know, NFTs, man. I'll give these guys a sad ape. They'll be happy. I didn't do anything. It means nothing.
That ape
But,
club. Yeah.
and I mean, will work because the NFT has the promise of,
Yeah.
right.
It reminds me of the suggested or maybe past recently passed or recently suggested changes to 401ks that are, you know, were never intended to be a retirement plan. They were meant to be a supplemental thing in addition to Social Security and pensions, but pensions are gone and Social Security is dying, and you know,
Yeah.
and now there's new changes which say you can invest more, you know,
Right.
coming down from the federal government about like how much you can invest tax free or whatever, and like changing the amounts you can invest when you're older, because when you're older you tend to earn more or whatever, and none of these are addressing the fact that the problem is the death of the pension and the underfunding of the Social Security system, right?
Yeah. Just totally gone. Which is just incredibly scary. But it, you know, and I wonder if the investment part is whoever is holding on to that money, whoever is that using that as leverage, you know, whoever's and I don't even know what these questions mean anymore. Like this like your money or your investment or yeah. Yeah. Anyways,
yeah. And speaking of unions,
yeah, go
also
ahead,
wanted
man.
to shout out that the AFL-CIO, the first woman president, was just elected. I heard an interview with her on OPB, NPR the other day.
Okay, that's good. And we got good national relation head right now too.
And also the Amazon Labor Union, got to shout out that, which is not affiliated with the traditional unions. They did it in it's actually interesting. I've listened to something about that too. There was a lot of leftist inspired action. People would go and be like salts and work there. They kind of organize from within rather than drawing on kind of established unions.
Yeah, I remember that guy got fired. I was listening to him today. He was on Chapo, but he was that guy was just like that. I really like that those guys that were going in and or just to organize, but there was also like just waiting at the bus stop when people would leave and come to work. But then you know, then again, there is how many times this has failed. You know, like unionization, I don't know, like what percentage? What is 7 or 8% of US workers? Like,
I mean, even if you're talking about, and if you're just talking about private workers,
yeah,
private sector, it's even lower. It's like microscopic.
yeah, like tiny, right? Um, I guess what I want to know, like I'm really interested in the kind of what is the thought process of the people that vote against these, like the workers. I mean, some of it, of course, I understand they just fall to this cliche, but some of them have to have some better reasoning for this shit like this.
Some people still associate unions with corruption from like the 80s, Jimmy Hoffa kind of stuff.
Sure.
Also, yeah, because this was also, there were scholars calling in on the episode. Another person said that anecdotally, non-union workers worked harder than union workers because it was kind of protection racket, so they didn't have to work as hard. And my thinking is that's good. Maybe all workers should be
Work less.
I think it's those things. And I think mainly a lot of it is also intimidation, fear by the company.
Yeah.
Because
That
you start firing once they start hearing you talk about that. And this is people's livelihoods.
Yeah, and I have to read this New Republic article today I saved, but it was about a administrative ruling about these captive audience stuff. They corral these
Yeah.
people and have a little fucking struggle session, which I was under the impression that these capitalists hated those kinds of things, but they just shamed the fuck like they just psychologically torture.
Which you would think would backfire. Like, I don't know, psychologically, you have to be more subtle with your kind of programming than that. If you just go up to someone and say, do this, a lot of times people will be contrarian and be like, I'm not gonna do that. You gotta
Yeah.
be very,
Part of it is the captive audience meetings take, a large labor force, fracture it into hundreds of like 4-person groups and dominate the social space for just long enough for you to feel cowed, isolated, alienated, separated, not stood up for, and then let you go before you sort of realize, like, hold on, what the fuck's happening here? They're
Yeah.
very psychologically targeted.
And also, like I was reading about that Amazon chat app. They for the workers, and he has like all these like word ban lists, that is very extensive. And the whole idea is that, we're gonna monitor the workers on this as if like people are like, I mean, I know they don't think people are that stupid that they're not gonna try to organize on these apps, but I guess they're like someone's gonna slip, I guess, right? But yes, it is that domination of the social. Yeah, it's very bizarre. Like you have like the bar association, like I see right now people like trying to take bar, and that application is like brutal because it's you're reporting everything, including like parking tickets from past 10 years. And of course, all of this is sold under, oh, this is the most ethical, or it ought to be the most profession, which is like, contra to a history
or like
of lawyers.
or what people think about lawyers versus what lawyers think about lawyers.
Yeah. Like nobody thinks, because they like, I'm the first one to say like your work is like never ethical. It's highly political. I mean, it's you're dealing with people's interests, man.
And we've all took ethics. Ethics, can also be a way to just justify your negative or your bad behaviors, or however you call them bad, by whatever meta ethical theory you have.
Yeah. So now I'm wondering. Now I'm like, oh, who the fuck is like but you know what it is, like this kind of guild is kind of like, you know, having files on this profession in every state, which is bizarre. I mean, it's highly not bizarre as a surveillance state, but it just happened. It appears everywhere. um yeah. um
I don't know. I'd want a lawyer who at least committed some of the same crimes as I have, just so he knows, they know what it's like to be me.
No shit, man. Nothing is worse than a lawyer that, like, you know, goes and, you know, is butting it up with like he's more, he or she or whatever, or he's more of the class of the judge, right? And the prosecutor, like that would be alarming.
Yeah. I'm not necessarily saying it would actually work, but I'm interested in the idea of a what do you call it, like kind of like a stakeholder notion of democracy, but where you only get to vote on something if it affects you directly. So like prisoners, lawyers, and prison guards would be the only people that get to actually make decisions about prison reform. And since prisoners radically outnumber them, you know, everything would sort of go that way.
If they wanted it better, they'd have to have less prisoners.
Exactly. Exactly.
I thought you were going to go with another Star Trek reference and say like a Klingon type law system where the lawyer faces the same punishment as
I didn't know that, but I would be down where lawyers represented my interest through combats like of arms. So because I would just stand on the side with the pistol and shoot the other lawyer and be like, I win.
And the lawyer was the most ethical person of the Klingons because he was like, look, I'm not a warrior. I study, I read books and stuff. Everyone hates me because they think I'm a
I got
wuss.
hernia, yeah. Don't do this to me. Yeah. No, that is I swear any of these things are better than what the fuck's happening right now.
Well, I mean, one of the things that was positive in the Amazon Staten factory was that they turned the captive audience meetings around just by speaking up in them. They made them a tool of organizing rather than a tool of isolation and alienation. And it will, you know, if you reasonably salt the factory, I mean, they won the vote because more people wanted it. So if all of those people are willing to speak up, you know, 55% of the people voted for it or something like that, you know, that means more than half the people in any given meeting are a union salt, you know, potential union salt.
Yeah, yeah, and I'm seeing more and more of that, and it might be just that people are now filming it and stuff like that, but it's it just like, yeah, it just has to give momentum, just because I know Amazon is just going to come back. I'm sure they're in White House right now. I mean, they're talking about stuff, and they'll corral the right too. They'll say, you know, they'll concede to them some things and they'll bring him in. Because yeah. I was it was yeah, anyways. Yeah, I guess so. So speaking of that, here's now that we're moving into like Bacon's rebellion and situations like this in like mid 17th century, right? Because now we are kind of dealing with emergence of social racial ideology. But I guess how her narrative is different is that it doesn't come peacefully, right? I mean, not peacefully or under submission. It comes with, again, this is just like her emphasis on peasant uprising. It comes in the form of uprisings. And And this tracks with especially like people's history of of America or United States. What was the title that Howard Zinn was? Because when he's talking about colonial Virginia, he does a lot of he puts a lot of emphasis on interracial riots and
Mm,
things like that.
right. Well, I mean, this also harkens back to a conversation we had in the first time we were all together about like, the misuse of divide and conquer, and then where it is fully meaningfully applied, not just the idea that people are like alienated from those they should be in natural solidarity with, but when there is an active, intentional effort to segregate populations along a usually mythologized vector. And Bacon's Rebellion is the like spark for the divide and conquer strategy being applied to racecraft in particular in Virginia.
Yeah. And I read that behemoth of a book, Cloud Splitter, about John shit, what was his
John Brown.
yeah, John Brown, which starts from early. It's like 1,000 pages or something, if not. But uh, and of course you see this in all these narratives. You forget how many people rebelled. How many? I mean, of course, there's slave uprisings and stuff, but how many like white people
Right.
that would get up like out of like bumfuck nowhere, like on a horse and buggy, and travel to take part in these, and fight against their localities. It's very important and um not only gives you better understanding, I think it's very good for morale to see these, because of course there's narratives that are often talked about. Yeah, I don't. Do you guys have a section here that, because I don't know if my actual highlights are pointing to correct
I have
things.
a section that's sort of continuing with the previous notion that with like divide and conquer, Bacon's Rebellion, and how this specifically prosecute. This is, I think, one of the reasons why. What am I trying to say? Federici would have put this in here anyways, because Federici's point goes beyond just the witch hunts. But Federici is interested in talking about how the witch hunts informed colonialism and informed the transatlantic slave trade and informed colorism, sort of like the inventions of racecraft and whatnot. So this section where just talking about, it's difficult to imagine that many of the people, it's hard to imagine workers in Europe profited from the conquest of America, at least in its initial phase. Let us remember that it was the intensity of the anti-feudal struggle that instigated the lesser nobility and the merchants to seek colonial expansion, and that the conquistadors came from the ranks of the most hated enemies of the European working class. I'm just talking about, I want to skip down 2 paragraphs from there, where she says, so strong was the attraction exercised by the New World that the vision of a new society it provided apparently influenced the political thought of the Enlightenment, contributing to the emergence of a new concept of quote, quote, liberty. taken to signify masterlessness, an idea previously unknown to European political theory. Not surprisingly, some Europeans tried to lose themselves in this utopian world where, as Linnebaugh and Rediker powerfully put it, they could reconstruct the lost experience of the commons. Some lived for years with Indian tribes despite the restrictions placed on those who settled in the American colonies and the heavy price to be paid if caught. Since escapees were treated like traitors and put to death, this was the fate of some young English settlers in Virginia who, having run away to live with the Indians, on being caught, were condemned by the colony's councilmen to be burned, broken on the wheel, and hanged or shot to death. But, you know, we should remember that that's just the supplice of fire, right? Like that, those are the technologies of torture designed to break women in the witch hunts.
Right.
There's an intertextuality happening there that is saying, like, if you betray whiteness to go live in indigeneity, you have become either woman-like, or you have lost the protections of society, or, you know, however you want to frame it. But there is a reduction and a loss of personhood that happens directly in line with how a witch would be treated.
Yeah. And she says, no argument, no treaties, no tears. A contemporary reported could persuade many of them to leave their Indian friends. On the other hand, Indian children have been carefully educated among the English, both and taught, and yet there's not one instance that any of these would remain but return to their own nations. And it's
Yeah.
yeah.
No wonder it seemed like such a dangerous thing that, what happened to indigenous peoples, even after, you could say what you want about the intentionality of the diseases, but kind of the erasure of language, genocides after that,
Right.
being pretty
No, I mean,
motivated.
there was explicit, right? I mean, we have U.S. generals saying, right, kill the Indians, save the man.
Right.
And in Canada too, and very recent, right? I mean, from my school, like a couple of miles up here, there was a boarding school, but the boarding school was mainly for Southern Alaskan children, Native children, because you want them to be as far away. And in that Joe Sacco kind of graphic novel about the Canadian folk, who, of course, they would be brought, and a lot of them would run away. I mean, there was such soldiers, of course, they would hear the planes, they would run away, they would hide, whatever, but then they would find their parents, right? So it's compulsory. Anyways, well, a lot of times, and he has kind of first account of these people, right? Because they're now like our parents' age. It's like, yeah, you go and you come back, and your dad tries to take you moose hunting, with the boys and girls who were left out, and you don't know what to do. You're like you're an adult boy that doesn't know how to skin a caribou, like in -50. So you're a stranger to your own people, and it really does take a couple of years. Also, you're educated, you're looked at as like snobbish, and you haven't spoken your language, of course, because it would have been illegal, like against the rules for you to do so. Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's weird, you go to in Alaska, some of these young folks are like now trying to learn, if there's an opportunity to learn the languages. I mean, thanks God, University of Fairbanks has kind of kept some of these and learning to kind of teach them. But a lot of these people, they're like, our parents wouldn't speak it out of shame, out of, and also like kind of keep us from feeling the same things. But anyways, the very recent history. Yeah. and maybe this line is important too here. As for the European proletarians who signed themselves away into indentured servitude or arrived in the New World in consequence of a penal sentence, their lot was not too different. At first, from the African slaves with whom they often worked side by side, their hostility to their masters was equally intense, so that the planters viewed them as dangerous lot, and by the second half of the 17th century began to limit their use and introduced the legislation aimed at segregating them from Africans. Yeah, and I guess we kind of touched that kind of becomes a necessity of racial ideology at this point, to like keeping these people away from each other, even though these so naturally find each other and come each other and trying to integrate with each other, right?
And
I mean,
also to
yeah.
kind of provide some privileges to whiteness, that some dignity,
Right.
even though they're your workers at the very bottom don't really have it that great, but at least they aren't able to be kind of put into a situation like the African slaves. Not to say that they aren't wage slaves.
Yeah.
Right.
And then adding to the divide and conquer thing too. We're up here, they're down there. Gives the white
This,
European workers someone to look down on.
the science of manager is born. That's how you get the manager mentality.
Right. It's
Yeah.
very interesting because you it's interesting in the physics, the like emotional physics of the situation or something like that, because you, in a relatively deft and simple maneuver, you force a white person to have to be a race traitor in order to engage in solidarity with a black individual, and in exchange for making someone take a treasonous, like putting someone in a position where any kind of solidarity is treason to one's entire race, nationality, culture, language, religion, everything. You give them just like the most trivial privileges, right? Just shit that like most people I don't think honestly want.
Not being an indentured servant, like that's we won't enslave you for make you pay to not be a worker.
Sure.
Yeah,
But
it just notes that
they already had the ability to get that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's not a reward, that's another penalty, because you stay as a worker instead of fighting for like an abolition to slavery, period.
Yeah, I guess in relation to the slavery, it becomes a reward, even though
Right.
it is a penalty.
Right.
You know, yeah, no, I remember like I mean this, you know, this is far from slavery, but I worked at this like bookbinding factory, Banta, and you know, I was kind of periodically go there as a temp, and you know, they bring like a bunch of temp, then they pick one as permanent, of course, you know, maybe, or get rid of them. And anyways, but so you're working within these, you know, yellow line section, and the person they would pick, and you would know your contract was about up with that group when you saw that they picked someone, but that person would get to like drive forklifts, right? And they will be so fucking proud. And like, you know, like, dun, I got a new vest. Now I get to be on the other side. Um, uh, but just as an analogy, yeah, it's just so fucking stupid, because you probably still get paid the same, but now you're a full-time employee. It's just fucking horrible. And but yeah, you're also liable for a bunch of other shit.
Yeah, I'm just thinking of like funny TV show episodes like that. My Name is Earl has one where he's a loader of like appliances, and becomes a salesman, and there's this conflict. Like you betrayed us, you sold us out to go in the front of the house.
Yeah.
But I did want to point out that we talked about this, but she points out at the end of this section how before 1650, white wasn't used. People were called Christians, English, freemen, and the white is associated with social and economic privilege.
Yeah.
Then black and African, which is associated with enslavement. And yeah, just that going from a kind of differentiating people by like, something, anyone could be Christian, really. You just have to kind of whatever, accept
Sure.
Jesus or practice it, or like even like earlier in ancient times, it would be more like linguistic kind of groupings, to having it become this kind of invented thing of white and black, just grouping this like broad range of skin tones of people in these two groups, and
Right.
making it a very essential quality that you're kind of born with or without.
Mm. Yeah.
Yeah,
it-
some
Go-
part of that is because the category stops cohering, right? Because you have slaves who are Christians, and
Well, you force them to be Christians,
right, right.
but you can't have them be Christians. They're Christians, but they're not Christians like we are.
Right.
So we have to come up with a new term to.
Yeah, which might be something like Christians who would renounce it and resume their pagan ways the moment we turned our back, or something like that. But to say it faster, we'll just say black or something like that.
Yeah.
Right. Because the Christian proselytization is like a rationale more than a reason, or something like
And
that.
most of those groups did, heavily like modify Christianity with their native beliefs, talking indigenous Mesoamerican people or Africans.
It's like slave Christianity, right? Where you read you I guess emphasize the sections where the kind of practice of obedience is part of your duty, while your master reads the other parts. Yeah, and of course, some of these slaves would have been Christians themselves, just not a Christianity that would have been recognized, right? Or they would have been Muslims that had full knowledge of these scriptures. Yeah, I guess by the time that ideology is here, it is permeated in the modes of production and kind of development of classes and all stuff. Yeah, I don't know what else to say on this section. You guys have anything else? I don't have any more notes on it. I don't know if you have.
No, that was the last thing for that section that I had.
Yeah, no, I mean, I have this is reminding me of a question I've been thinking about recently,
Yeah.
but it's not necessarily relevant to this. It's just more
Bring it.
about like, it seems like we're going through the retraction of whiteness from Russian people, like right now. I guess whiteness has generally been conceived as like an expansive category that can choose to like rope in new nationalities and ethnicities as it will, so long as it maintains the epistemological character of anti-blackness. But I wonder, like, is like this reversal of Russian nationals from the sort of like protections of whiteness and the like the humanity of whiteness, what that implies about it. But that might just be outside of the purview of what we're talking about.
No, that's, I was thinking about that today because I was listening to what I was looking at I was watching a Sean Hannity clip,
Mhm.
and he was talking about, what was he saying? He was talking about, once you've invaded a sovereign country, you've, lost your whatever rights to be in a, which is, just the
Mhm.
irony. But what is interesting is that he was talking about the Asiatic Russian society versus Western Europe. And
Right.
then this whole time I'm like, wait a minute. Is Eastern Europe now Western Europe too? What the fuck's happened? Because that's coming. Like I feel like it's at Poland and these places. Not Estonia, right?
But it's Eastern
Um,
Western Europe.
that's yeah, which I knew, like, okay, like they're thinking that we need to recalibrate whiteness because it's a lot more better short kind of a signifier for it.
Mhm.
Yeah, I wonder.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the Russians, people are still in kind of Cold War mentality. So Russia still has a lot of the kind of Soviet um, taint in a lot of kind of Republicans and minds, which doesn't make any sense at all.
At all. I mean,
But I could feel that communists would have lost their whiteness. So I think it might carry over.
yeah, that would have been
There's a
been
lot of
easier.
Republicans and racists supporting Putin, so that means they must be white because they don't support non-white people. I don't know. It's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, we went through this kind of with East Germany. I mean, we went through it first with the Nazis, right? I mean, we're not in war with Germans. It's just Nazis or Axis, and then there is the East Germans are this or that or have this kind of characteristic. Um, yeah, no, that's really interesting, and I want, because white nationalism is very strong in Russian nationalism, and they're gonna want to contend that, but I just don't think they'll be up for it.
Right.
Yeah, the traditionalist. I would think they would be arguing that we are whiter than the other whites. We're like the original
Sure.
whites.
Yeah, we're the country the Caucasian mountains are in.
Yeah,
So,
it's right there in the name, Caucasian.
Yeah, it's weird, when you watch the video of the Ukrainian soldiers shooting the guys that are surrendering, the guy keeps saying Georgian, the Russian guy, and he thinks that's gonna save him. Um, yeah, none of these conversations are there in these fucking Soviet stuff that are Soviet documents. They don't have any conception of these things. They're very ethnic conscious. They want to redo all those deliberately early on. So this is like, not to speak like a historian now, but it is a very, very modern phenomenon. That's that white Russian thing. Because even they were Eastern Orthodox, and like not even your Christianity is good for these people. Not even your version of like Catholicism is.
Yeah, Russia having this being this kind of major player on the stage is kind of pretty modern because before the Russian Revolution, it was Russia had a lot of people in an area, but that was it. It wasn't as industrialized as the other European countries.
Yeah.
But in the last 100 years or so, Russia, is a major figure in global politics.
Yeah.
I mean, that's why what happened in Ukraine in the 30s happened in Ukraine was to pursue that modernization and sort of industrialization, and you know,
Yeah, I mean, they're
yeah,
estimating good amount of famine coming out of this, like 57 million people, like definitely.
mhm.
I mean, yeah.
I use the specific use of the word Asiatic. It's reminding me of that was like one of the specific words that was used to condemn Rosa Luxemburg and Ewald. I think that's the person's name. In the 1918 revolution in Berlin.
Yeah, ECH Wald or something. Equal. I don't know how to pronounce it.
And yeah, like when the Social Democrats started calling for war, they started using in this specifically this word of like the leftism, you know, the radical leftism is an Asiatic phenomenon. You know, these people are Asiatic Germans, like it's a transmissible quality or something like that. Like a
Yeah.
tide or something. The tide has come in and the tide is Asiatic or something.
Which kind of just like reveals the whole like bullshit behind it of even like the whiteness, that it's just something, it's a label you attach to people. It's nothing to do with genetics, bloodline, or if it
Right.
does, it's very loose connection there.
Right. Yeah. Phenotypical happenstance or something like that. You know.
Yeah, yeah. And of course, like, yeah.
Yeah, then that makes sense with Russia because there's it's common. So you have to kind of other the enemy before you go to war with them.
Right. Right.
Yeah, even in this, like when they talk about, oh, like they were like the cosmopolitan kind of Soviets, but then you have the Georgians, which of course like Stalin and Beria and some of these people, all of them, and then you have like central kind of plateaus, kind of Russians, which have more kind of features that are that are closer to kind of the Mongolians.
Yeah, I would just want to apply that to America, the US, and be like, you have the cosmopolitan coastal elites, you have the Georgians, don't go to Georgia, you have the well, the whole South. Then you have like, you could do this with any country if you want to kind of
Yeah,
break.
no, I mean it's very interesting, I don't know if you've read Thomas Sowell's Black Redneck and White whatever, which is like one of the most disgusting fucking books. But kind of the thesis of that book is that, when he's saying that, oh, like, yes, slavery did bring Africans here, but then they lost their culture, and then they adopted the poor white trash culture, and that's why they're both, socially retarded. And of course, Thomas Sowell, or Sal himself, is a black man, and and of course, none of this is. I mean, she's just like amusing away, but then he's like, look, um, both of these groups are like overtly religious, overtly emotional. They're fucking lazy, so that's how and and he's saying like, you want a proof of this? Oh, look at a lot of like the African immigrants that come here, right? That are more successful. And then there's like the hierarchy of like
Mm,
good immigrant and stuff like that.
sure.
But but in the inside that kind of conservatism, and this is coming back because that's what fucking the Ohio guy, JD Vance's book was about, right? Of course, now he's including Mexicans with it this week, but his the whole argument, our story arc of that book is that, you know, this poor white trash culture, like these fucking people don't go to Yale like I do, when they have everything, blah blah blah. Yeah, so I really want people to like pay attention to that, like the purest kind of form of racism that comes from the conservative ideology, because they really, because even skin tone drops in that. They're really looking for, they're look at, they're really understanding class, in that sense. Um,
Yeah.
but I
Also,
wonder
like,
how it applies to Russia. Yeah.
was terrified of a material analysis, right? Because I mean,
Yeah.
maybe being property injures your ability to, like, be sorry, I forgot the English word for fleisig, fastidious, hardworking, whatever, like to accrue material wealth and uh go in this particular, like, work grind ethic, whatever.
Right.
And it's also just factually untrue, right? Both of poor white trash uh and of Black individuals across the country, like, hustle culture is alive and well.
It's I mean, it's work. I don't understand what these people say. I don't know what they think these people do in, like, reddish knob fucking West Virginia.
Mm.
They're working. It's just that their work doesn't lead to anything, You go play with numbers on your computers, your bank goes up, these people go fucking, at a dollar store and come back empty handed. I mean, I don't, and there's nothing else, Okay, you're in Charleston, you lecture anthropology or you work at a tech company. But if you're anywhere else in that state, like, what are you going to do? I mean, coal mining is not a thing, by the way, like, it's a tiny force that is in that dwindling industry.
You just
The
gotta do
rest of the people,
you find a diamond down there. There's probably diamonds down there. I played Minecraft.
You're
you're
gonna
just
work
not
at
working hard enough, you son of a bitch. Get down there.
you work at Amazon. If there's not one there, you drive around in a trailer and then find one and
Mm.
work at them part-time.
Pokemon Go, fucking Amazon trucks. But yeah, it's like I like the white people have to understand how much these people hate them. Uh, for some of them do, I guess, but
I mean, I just want to say that in the year 2009, 10, yeah, 2009 and 2010, I was working at a job in Ohio making $3.73 an hour. And it didn't matter if you work full time at $3.73 an hour, you know. That was the job that was available when I came back, and I took it because it was that or nothing. But yeah, my rent was like $3.50. I mean, I lived off food stamps, right? There was nothing there. It's like an absurd, it's like just an absolute nonsense amount of money. So
yeah,
I've been there, and I'll say from like the other end, from having like a job now where I have like pretty good salary, benefits. It feels pretty nice, and I feel a lot less stressed out, and I'm not worrying about money. I'm not broke most of the time. Not always trying to get more hours at work or not getting them and things like that. Less precarious, not completely stable, because who knows next year. But yeah, and one thing it made me think of is like
to ever need
tipping.
to like get more hours.
Hmm.
Nobody actually wants to work more hours. Fucking bullshit. Uh,
No one wants to work a double shift. No one ever in history would want to do that. But yeah, and I was thinking about tipping too, and how of course you should tip your server, but at the same time, this is just the employer making the customer pay some of their employee's wage. And it has very racist origins. And this is one of the first ways previously enslaved people would start working at as like kind of like servers. Wouldn't get paid, but they would get tips, or they'd get paid very little.
Yeah.
But we need to end tipping is my
And tipping.
and one of the many things that communism would fix,
Add it to the list. Things to do. Yeah. Well, that's all I have for this thing.
Yeah, I don't have much even for the rest of the chapter.
No, I mean we covered it because I think the last section is just like an introduction to going into capitalism, which is yeah, then when we get to that section, I guess we'll get into it.
Yeah. I mean, there's a sort of articulation of the specific steps, which is productive, principally because the normal understanding of history is like, here's something that happened here because this big famous person said so, and then here's something 110 years later that happened, and all the connective tissue is stripped out of it. And so this section, what is this one called?
What page are you on?
108, the sex, race, and class in the colonies.
Okay.
This,
I'm gonna read the rest of this with that the one you send me, so I have to say. Okay, 108. Let's go.
Yeah.
The one with the picture, right? The branding picture.
Yes, right, correct. Yeah, and so there's a sort of a much more granular look at the history of English women transported from Britain as convicts or indentured servants, became a significant part of the labor gangs, considered unfit for marriage. They were dismissed to manual labor, public construction works, and urban service sector. In these worlds, they socialized intimately with the slave community and with enslaved Black men, established households, and had children with them. Cooperated as well and competed with female slaves in the marketing of produce for stolen goods. With the institutionalization of slavery, there's a marginal elevation of white women who get married off and become, eligible bachelorettes, I guess. Back to this notion of protecting women's honor, which becomes a sort of fixation of white men, principally because it's denied whole cloth to Black women, which is why the historical roots of Black masculinity, caring so deeply for the honor of Black women. And then anyway, so we're going sort of section by section by section, talking about all these different changes, and each one of them is important, but none of them are individually pivotal pieces, I guess. That's my take on this section. Definitely worth reading, definitely worth digesting. Pretty straightforward generally.
Yeah, I mean it is talking about kind of different manifestations or kind of results of organization as such, and there's positive sides to it. I mean, I'm kind of looking at the notes on especially 113 and 114, where she constantly talks about how people still find a way to come together, right? But kind of 113, it wasn't in his second paragraph, or rather first paragraph in 113. It was in this capacity that female slaves also came into contact with white proletarian women, often former indentured servants, even after the latter had been removed from gang labor and emancipated. The relationship at times could be hostile. Proletarian European women, who also survived mostly through the growing and marketing of food crops, stole at times the products that slave women brought to the market or attempted to impede their sales. But both groups of women also collaborated in building a vast network of buying and selling relations, which evaded the law passed by the colonial authorities, who periodically worried that these activities may place the slave beyond their control. So this is kind of different versions of these women coming in contact.
Yeah, that's interesting because it's a market, or like a very kind of a place where people, like some people, capitalist apologists speak, the market like frees us to, can collaborate in this productive competition or something, but it's showing here that it both can be kind of a site of conflict or cooperation of these different groups.
Right. Yeah. 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 I mean, the only thing that impedes the taking over of the market, right? Because I guess market is not entirely bad. Is their inequality? Um, as she's saying, stealing or something, but they still find a way. And then she goes on to say, I guess 2 paragraphs down, instead, Caribbean women had also decisive impact on the culture of the white population, especially that of white women, through their activities as healers, seers, experts in magical practices, and their domination of the kitchens and bedrooms of their masters. Um, what is called? What the sociological word?
Yeah, it just seems like that's the kind of origin of this kind of fetishization of the Black culture,
Mm-hmm.
African culture. And how much that these cultures, enslaved people's cultures, have influenced American culture and white culture in general.
Yeah, it's very interesting. Like when Rick Santorum, he was giving that speech at the George Mason or where the fuck it was, but no, it might have been like a high school. It's like explicitly, it was like Native American culture is no influence on our culture, right? Like they just dissipate. And it's just I don't like, sometimes the claim is so fucking wrong, like to the face. I mean, like look, like why does an eagle represent the United States, right? Or there's like clutching up. I mean, everything. But yeah, it does move upward. It does seep into Pascal. Yeah.
We have anything else?
Not me.
I have a correction from last week from my corner.
Oh yeah. We're moving to that part. Yeah, let's do it.
Yeah, last week I said this was the
Repent.
favorite book in the series, the Mars trilogy, This is actually the second one, which I haven't read. This is like
You
got
did it
the order
twice.
all wrong, and I read hundreds of pages of this,
Oh,
so I have to forget all that. I'll do some drinking or something. And I want to recommend something this week that's I was looking for it
good.
somewhere here, but John Brown made me think of it. Oh, if you let me share my screen, I can do that.
Oh,
But
let
it's
me,
called- I can show a
yeah,
picture.
yeah.
But
No,
it's called-
how do I rename,
they're
remove?
like share settings.
Never let go.
I have to go to the setting. Okay.
Share like little arrow next to. I do this like a lot a day. Like this is my job. Figuring out Zoom.
Wait,
But
wait,
it's
wait.
called-
Okay, okay. Lead me through it. What was it?
You go. There's a little arrow next to share screen. Little up
Okay.
arrow. Click
Uh-huh.
that, and you go
Oh,
to sharing settings. And it says who can share screen? Only hosts or all participants.
multiple participants. Okay.
Okay.
Did it teach?
Oops, it's not that. That's Ursula. My background. Yeah, it's called Fire on the Mountain by Terry Besson. He's a white guy, but you think he's French Canadian or something. And this edition has a really cool intro by Mumia Abu Jamal, who's a huge science fiction fan.
Yeah.
But this book is about an alternate history where John Brown and Harriet Tubman won. And so the South is like, that's still separated, but the South is like a communist utopia, pretty much. It's a Black communist utopia, and the North is like a more Democrat, but very kind of good relations there. And yeah, it's not really long book, but it's really interesting, really hopeful. And
That's amazing. Yeah, I'll look. Fire on the Mountain. It's pretty good.
And it comes from that because they were like, look, that was one of the signals of their rebellion. And something happened with it where Harriet Tubman was sick in real life and couldn't go. John Brown's rebellion, but in this book she is able to go. And so I like that it's
All the difference.
the difference is Harriet Tubman being a badass,
Yeah.
that was the nail.
With a machete. Fucking scary.
If they had people, man, Jesus Christ, they could have done it. I mean, been to Harper's Ferry. It's a tiny place. It would have been just like a bunch of people.
Yeah,
These
and then,
guys like
this
rode all
South-
the way from Ohio or some shit. Huh?
And then by like 19 in the book, I forgot the best part is like the book, it's like in 1950 is when it takes place, and there's like Black astronauts on Mars, like they're doing a Mars landing at the same time as the story's happening.
Oh, really? That's amazing.
That reminds me is like one of the core features of capitalism, and then more specifically like capitalist realism, that says something like, look at all the positive capitalism's done, and it's always like it's a comparison to nothing.
Right.
If capitalism wasn't here, we would be just waiting for capitalism to show up, and we would do nothing. We wouldn't even eat. And is it absurd to imagine that there would be Black astronauts on Mars in 1950? Maybe not. Like,
Yeah.
how much labor is taken off towards like the hoard of wealth?
I read a book that was
Yeah.
there was British astronauts on the moon in 1920 in the Victorian era, by a Black woman author. So, not as bad as it might sound. But I think it just, like for want of a nail kind of stories of something had happened, and, scientific progress that continued in one way, perhaps.
Yeah, and lack of oppression, and like the markets, of course, saying like unproductive capital, like just bullshit slush fund that is going absolutely nowhere.
Yeah, I mean, science in general, I think, is oriented toward a sharing kind of economy, or an
You
open
have to. I
economy.
mean, it's based on information. Yeah, and human ingenuity.
It would thrive best in a place where you wouldn't have
Open
to pay this
society.
huge amount of fee to download a PDF online about a paper or something, or subscribe to a journal through your school. Yeah.
Fucking absurd. It's like Yeah, I mean, every time you're on a school library, you're like, why? Our laws, I don't know. It's like, like all the big systems that are available to the students are not available to lawyers. They're incredibly expensive to do legal research, to the point that, my friend that is a lawyer can't afford. Um, Absurd. There were states that privatized their publishing of laws. Thank God those like were overturned.
And I was just thinking that today, like I wasn't meant to live like this. I was meant to just like study, read books, study, do some like kind of natural philosophy of the world. Like, what's this rock made out of?
Yeah,
Think about it for a while.
yeah.
Yeah. But
No,
they
I
made that.
always tell my professors, I was built to do metaphysics, like just most absurd, and highly religious metaphysics. Like I'm here out of necessity. I don't want to be part of this. I want to raise dogs and I want to do that. Like
I just want to go around talking to animals. I want to be what was the name of that saint?
Francis.
Yeah. The
Mm.
saucy. That's
Was
who I
bigger-
want to
sparrows. Yeah.
I was a bigger fan of Sankt Goa and how he spoke to the animals, but yeah, I think Francis is the famous one.
What does Saint Goa do?
Or Dr. Doolittle. It's the American one.
Right. Saint Doolittle. I don't know. Sankt Goa could dance on beams of light, and once was challenged by a cardinal who didn't believe he was a holy man. He said, "If you're really a holy man, then tell me who is the father of this baby." And Sankt Goa said, "You are." And the cardinal was like, "Oh my God, you really are touched by God. I give up my cardinalship and I will become your disciple."
Wow.
So, yeah. And he liked to talk to animals. So,
That all it took.
apparently.
He was like the original Maury Povich.
Yeah, exactly.
What was the story behind Philip Pullman's inspiration? Because it was saints with animals, right? Like especially that lady or the nun with the ferret, I think was inspiration behind Lyra. There's a lot of those, huh? Like Christian saints that are communing with
Yep.
birds and the bees. Yeah. Mark, did you want to plug in something?
I would say that this was the chapter in this book that I realized how valuable the endnotes are here. And even though they're a little tedious to get through,
Oh, yeah. They're
they don't
chunky.
require a lot of digestion. They're more like you read them, you sit there, you think about them, or you read them, you let them go. They're not as much like a lot of endnotes are, where they're just citations. They're not there just to like show you how they're supporting their reasoning. It's more like extra information, and very nuanced, specific, contextualized information. And it tells it makes the story a bit more coherent, because even though there's some complexity to this book, it's to be honest about it, it's really like overly simplified as a narrative to make it palatable, to make it digestible, not palatable.
Yeah, you guys should you should definitely make a point to point out the endnotes, because for me, I have it on the PDF on my reader, and it's always like it's always hard to like go back and forth because you have to just scroll so much and it takes a long. Whereas a paper
I
book,
do wish there were footnotes, because he's saying they're paragraphs,
Mm.
each one of them, because she explains in great detail, or integrated into text. That would have been good too.
Yeah.
But I understand, like Mark saying, why she did it, because each one of those generalized statements are like its own kind of complexity.
Like,
Yeah, it's always probably like something to, yeah, there's drawbacks both ways. You like you were saying, like Mark was saying, it does kind of flow very well. It tells the story, and put footnotes in there, it kind of breaks it up and kind of blocks it all. But having the end notes means like they're not always accessible, not right there.
Yeah, yeah, and in this book, I definitely see a desire to reach general audience.
Mhm.
And I understand it would be difficult,
We didn't
but
even talk about like what's going on with kind of control of women's bodies right now. So like this is a book that I wish you could just kind of like put into people's water and get them to drink it. You know?
yeah, yeah. The first time I heard about this book, it was like 20 something years ago. This girl, and I remember exactly what she said. She's still my friend, but she had just done grad school, and she was like, I read this book, Caliban the Witch, and it like changed my mind. Of course, at that point, I was just like, I was like, wow, that's this great title.
Hmm.
Um, anyways, then I bought it, and then it sat on here. Like I tried to read it a couple of times. I sold it, but then I don't know, something came up, and I was like, I need to reach out like to James or someone to kind of get me through it. Yeah.
Yeah, the title definitely was what drew me in first. I don't remember when it wasn't that long ago that I first encountered it, but title. I'm like,
Yeah.
oh, Caliban from X-Men. Yeah. And cool.
And seeing her helps too. Like I started seeing, with the advent of YouTube, I started being like, oh, she's hanging out with everyone I love. So I must, love her too, So yeah.
Yeah, I want to read one of them.
Do
This
it.
is note 42 from this chapter.
Let me go. What page is that?
The notes on page 125.
Jesus,
And
pages and pages. Oh my God. Yeah, I got it. It's page one. Yeah.
yeah, it
Leroy Lager.
showed up when, gosh, a while back. It originally showed up something like page 77 is what it's like referring to. Something like that. Anyways, so the growing interest of capitalist entrepreneurs for money lending was perhaps the motivation behind the expulsion of the Jews from most cities and countries of Europe in the 15th and 16th century. Parma in 1488, Milan in 1489, Geneva in 1490, Spain in 1492, and Austria in 1496. Expulsions and pogroms continued for a century until the tide was turned by Rudolph II in 1577. It was illegal for Jews to live in most of Western Europe. As soon as money lending became a lucrative business, this activity previously declared unworthy of a Christian was rehabilitated, as shown by this dialogue between a peasant and a wealthy burgher, written anonymously in Germany around 1521. Peasant, what brings me to you? Why, I would like to see how you spend your time. Burgher, how should I spend my time? I sit here counting my money. Can't you see? Peasant, tell me, Burgher, who gave you so much money that you spend all your time counting it? Burgher, you want to know who gave me my money? I shall tell you. A peasant comes knocking at my door and asks me to lend him 10 or 20 gulden. I inquire of him whether he owns a plot of good pasture land or a nice field for plowing. He says, yes, I have a good meadow and a fine field worth 100 gulden between the two of them. I reply, excellent. Pledge your meadow and your field as collateral, and if you'll undertake to pay 1 gulden a year as interest, you can have your loan of 20 gulden. Happy to hear the good news, the president replies, I gladly give you my pledge. But I must tell you, I rejoin, that if ever you fail to pay your interest on time, I will take possession of your land and make it my property. And this does not worry the peasant. He proceeds to assign his pasture and field to me as pledge. I lend him the money and he pays interest punctually for a year or two. Then comes a bad harvest and soon he's behind in his payment. I confiscate his land, evict him, and his meadows and field are mine. And I do this not only with peasants, but with artisans as well. If a tradesman owns a good house, I lend him a sum of money on it. And before long, the house belongs to me. In this way, I acquire much property and wealth, which is why I spend all my time counting my money. And I picked it because it was like a descriptive note, but also a long one and one that doesn't fit in the narrative of the text, but does show the ways in which well, a couple things, talks about the specific history of the Jewish expulsions and also how anti-Semitism gets filtered just into banking, where we still have tropes of it today, and et cetera, et cetera. So
Yeah,
Yeah.
and well, there's more of that too. The peasant says, and I thought only the Jews practice usury. Now I hear that Christians do it too. Where it says, usury, who's talking about usury? Nobody here practices usury. What the debtor pays is interest. So
exactly.
reframing this whole thing is like, yes, that's still a Jewish thing.
Mhm.
I'm doing something completely different, even though same result, the same thing.
Yeah, this is very interesting. I mean, and there's so much history in this and that, because of course a lot of these Jews end up in the Ottoman Empire, which works fucking wonderful. Um, but it's also with which Christianity, of course, exactly what you mean. The idea of interest came, and suddenly
Mhm.
the very explicit imperative against it were ignored. But in Islam to this day, like, you have, not that you don't have interest, of course you have it, but now you have like these kind of like financial lawyers that advise banks into how to like conduct it correctly and whatnot.
Mhm.
And I don't know all the details of it, but yeah. No, but you're right. I mean, I'm looking at all these footnotes now, and they all have just huge chunks of explanation in it.
Mhm.
Um,
Yeah, the ones talking about like the mines of Huancavelica, for example, or Cerro de Potosi. Those descriptions are useful as understanding, not, I think the authorial decision to keep them out is important to keep her work from becoming trauma porn.
yeah,
But it's also important to understand that, like, these people were being worked to death in a mercury mine, which is just fucking wretched. And like the idea that we get um, management technologies out of this, it feels difficult to imagine there was ever a time where people were managing a mine under a royal order with the threat of their livelihood and literal imprisonment hanging over them, as was so often the case in these colonial charters,
hmm
and weren't capable of recognizing that, like, the people that they're working in the mine is obviously their most precious resource. It's bizarre. So,
yeah,
but it for somehow it took the extermination of wild proportions of the indigenous peoples of the Americas for European aristocracy to learn these lessons and engage in management, quote unquote, of slaves.
yeah.
So, anyways, that's my plug.
Yeah, we need to read that book, Accounting for Slavery, and I need to read it. I'm interested in kind of diving into that in more detail.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that what did those decisions look like? Also, I really want to see like how they had like the actual codification
Mm-hmm.
of it, or the development of the codification of it.
Yeah.
And what part of it they kept and what they got rid of.
Yeah, I'd like to see some of that qualitative data in particular about like descriptors and whatnot.
Yeah. Um,
I think that's
yeah. I what do I want to recommend? I've been kind of doing a lot of not reading because like exams are coming up and I'm just reading too much, but I've been kind of listening to a lot of this channel on YouTube that, this person, she goes through the channel's called Nerd Cookies, and she does these fabulous deep dive into Dune lore, and I think she does other stuff too. But I'm really, I just remember by the time I read Emperor Dune, being like, what the fuck is happening right now? It's just by the fourth or fifth book, I could not keep track of all these people that keep coming back and forth. But now that I'm kind of like, reading, kind of revisiting it, I'm like, oh wow, there's so much kind of sublime, extended time, conception of things, right? Like, yeah, I don't know. That's a little bit of that. Maybe I'll kind of reread those one day after finishing The
Cool.
Expanse.
I'm gonna send you Red Mars.
Oh yes, please. I would love to. That's what I need right now. I need to.
I almost bought The Expanse
Yeah.
this week, but no, I gotta find a cheap copy of this books. I feel like if
Expanse
I
is very
watch this
fun.
show, I mean, I'm sure they're good books, but I've watched the show. I feel like I don't know, I just can't bring myself to pay full price for a book of a show I've already watched, even though I know the book is better. It's not.
And the shows track very well with the books, so you'll be robbed of all those, like, the surprises, of course. But
Mhm.
yeah, like Red Roderick says, life is short, man. Like, if
I mean, I was thinking about
if
this
you're to-
earlier, like talking about spoilers. It's always a spectrum because you're spoiled. I already know how the language is going to go. I know you're never going into a work of art completely new, completely blind to all the things. It's connected to all these different. And I've read a lot of sci-fi, so I know like how a lot of things go sometimes. So,
right.
but people just don't want like a certain percentage of spoilage. But we still want to know, like, is it good? Does things happen? Just don't want specific details. But I don't remember what happened in the first seasons at this point of that show, so it'll be fine.
Yeah,
Some
yeah.
stuff with alien goo, right? Not molecule.
Oh, the protomolecule.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's when it comes, and then Jesus Christ, then it goes into. Yeah, it
It'd be
gets
good to
really
get back to what's his name? Thomas Jane with the guy with the hat and the shapes out of his head. I like that character.
Yeah.
Like,
Um, I want. Yeah. No, you read that. I'll read Red Planet or Red Mars or whatever, and
yeah.
we'll
He
see
also
where
has
we're
red.
at. Red Moon.
It's another one of his.
Oh, okay. Send me all the red things. Yeah. All right, folks. That's all I have.
Me too.
Awesome. Thank you for coming here, sharing, talking, looking.
You're welcome for all the information and wisdom we give you.
Please compensate me. Yeah.
Yeah, I
Cool.
don't have Patreon, but just make one for me and put money on it.
And pay the
And
taxes.
cash in the
Yeah.
mail.
Do my taxes.
You guys up for next week, 9:30
Mm.
or
Yeah.
9?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, probably 9.
Awesome.